Hello and welcome to Horizon Weekly TV. Toronto's Pomegrenate Film Festival held its 12th edition this year. More than 40 films were screened from 17 different countries. I'm joined today by two executive producers of the film Architects of Denial, who came all the way from Hollywood to speak to us and to be present at the premiere, Dean Cain and Montel Williams.
Thanks for having us.
And it's the Canadian premiere of Architects of Denial.
Yes, we were at the American premiere, of course, and now we're at the Canadian premiere. I don't know if it's been shown in Armenia yet, but maybe we'll be out there for the Armenian premiere as well.
So I was going around the festival and people are asking and they're curious about, why are non-Armenians interested, who are interested in making this film? How and why on earth Dean Cain and Montel Williams?
You know, it's really funny. We were at a screening in Los Angeles, and it was really a big one, the biggest one that we've done so far. And randomly, a gentleman came up to me in the middle of it before we actually showed the film, and he introduced himself and his wife. His wife was pregnant, and he said to me pointedly, and it just struck me. He said, "Montel, I thank you so much for doing this, but I don't get it. You know, you're not Armenian."
Exactly.
And I looked at him for a second. I said, "Yeah, but I'm human." And that's why I'm involved in this. I've been involved in issues that really have been out there to kind of see if I could be the voice for those who can't speak for themselves. And as much as the Armenian community has been screaming this at the top of your lungs, nobody's listening. So it takes voices like Superman and Montel Williams to at least elevate it, I think, a little bit enough to make people stop and go, why? Just the fact that they asked that question now makes them look at the content. And that's what's so important.
I was a history major in college. I went to Princeton University and I studied history, and a lot of what I studied was war and diplomacy. And then I was doing a film with a friend of mine named Cain Montel, who might be Armenian. He's definitely Armenian. And we were discussing history and things, and he says, well, how much do you know about the Armenian genocide? This is 15 years ago. And I was like, how much do I know about the Armenian genocide? Not a whole lot.
Well, did they teach you this while you were
That's
doing
exactly
your
it.
major?
I didn't hear much about it. Now, I don't know that the Princeton history books were glossing over it. I never studied that particular time, but I don't recall being aware of it. So I was embarrassed. As a Princeton grad, I was like, wait a minute, why don't I know about the Armenian genocide? So I went to my first march, April 24th, probably 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, in Los Angeles. And I started seeing so many young Armenians and people marching through the streets, and I said, okay, I got to learn more about this. And so I started to learn more about this. And Montel and I have done charity work all over the world. Africa, Vietnam, everywhere, and like he said, you know, being able to be a voice for those who can't speak for themselves. Well, this is something, you know, we don't agree all the time politically. We will argue when it comes to politics, but something we can agree upon is the fact that genocide is wrong and it needs to be called what it is in order to stop it from happening today and in the future.
And you take a look at what's going on right now in the world. I mean, the most important thing that I think both of us have talked about when it comes to Architects of Denial is that a genocide denied is the reason for those that exist now. I mean, remember, one of the most important, I didn't get a chance to tell you this, was kind of crazy. I'll tell them this on the air. 2 weeks ago, man, I'm sitting in the Soho House in LA. Now, you know, I don't know if you guys know anything about the Soho House, but it's, you know, it's like, you know, bourgeois.
It's very shishi.
It's very shishi. You don't talk to people. You know, there's celebrity over there, celebrity over there. I just happened to be there in a meeting, but trippy.
Oh, I heard this.
You hear this? Sitting about 3 tables over to the right. I won't say the name yet, but he was sitting there, a guy that's sitting with his wife, and the person that we're talking to had their back to us. Throughout my hour and a half now, I'm at a lunch. This person looked up to me about 3 times, kind of looked, and he got ready to get up to leave. When he stood up to leave, he shook the person's hand in front of him, and he turned to me, and he starts walking like this. This was George Clooney. And the reason why, George Clooney walks over to me, and I stood up, he gave me a hug. He goes, Montel, listen to me, man, I love your show, but I really love what you're doing right now. I really do. And thanks for what you're doing with the movie Architects. And I went, dude, what you don't know is this morning we just found out that we made the short list for possible Oscar nomination.
Oh, wow.
So the film is now, you know, on the 154.
You even had that little secret you didn't tell me.
I just got you.
Well, speaking about this, guys, tell us about the movie.
The film's really, it's about genocide itself, and we use the Armenian genocide as the means to tell the story of what happens if you don't call a genocide what it is. There's so many people, it's hard to watch. The images and the things that you see are very difficult to watch, but it makes it impossible to deny that it took place in our minds. And it's a story, it's a human rights story. It's not a political story. As a history major, I always say that the truth, I mean, it's incontrovertible evidence, and you can't deny it took place. And it's embarrassing to hear that it is being denied still. And George Clooney's in the film, and he has a quote that he says, and he used it when Hitler was preparing for the final solution. He said, you know, I'll paraphrase it, but he said, after all, who remembers the Armenians? And that was one of the justifications for trying to get rid of the Jews. And that's still what goes on today. That's happening all over the place. So the film talks about other genocides that are happening today, but it goes really in depth as to what happened in the Armenian genocide. And the way it's denied by even our own lawmakers in the United States, it's embarrassing to us that the United States doesn't recognize the Armenian genocide. 46 of our 50 states do it. The federal government does not.
But watch this. When you're talking about denying this genocide, denying 1.5 million souls were lost.
Oh, more than that. You got 750,000 Assyrians, 900,000 Greeks. It's about 3 million people.
So you look at it that as a blip. That's such a blip. And I think for humanity, for us to deny that, and now we look at what's going on right now around the world, places from Myanmar and other places all over the planet where there are, under the guise of whatever you want to call it, the same thing happening. You can call it, racial cleansing, but it's genocide. That's what's going on. And then we find out in the last couple weeks, there's now video coming out of Libya where they have started open sale of human beings again. Yeah. Slavery is wide open. When you deny you deny. This is how we wind up where we are.
I found it interesting in your film's trailer, how there was congressmen, or it was politicians, right, where the question was asked. This was a genocide, and they say no, this was not a genocide.
Yeah, we have at least two denying that it took place.
How did this production take place over a span of how many years?
Well, this was over 4.5 years, almost 5 years. And one thing that's very, very interesting when you watch the film and you look at the very end, you don't see names in the credits, because a lot of these names are anonymous to protect people who over 4.5 years were in places with cameras that they should not have been. And if they ever go back, they're going to get in trouble. So this was put together piecemeal. Some of the interviewees that we have in here, we can't even find today, because it took place and they had to go back to their life. I think one of the things that's going to be really, really powerful and tough for people to see is the fact that we have one 104-year-old person and a 105-year-old person.
Survivor of the genocide.
Who were there, children who saw with their own eyes.
You had them interviewed in the United States?
No.
Or they?
In Armenia.
Okay, your trip to Armenia, how did that go? How did that happen?
It was great.
It was amazing. Well, we were a lot of the time we were during.
First of all, when was this? Let's try to orient.
This was
last year?
February, was it early February, March last year?
I honestly can't remember the exact date.
There was snow.
It was cold, but it was unseasonably cold. But we interviewed tons of people, a lot of Syrian Armenians whose grandparents had been originally marched to Aleppo during the genocide, and somehow it survived. And these kids were born there, and now they're 40, 50, 60 years old. And they're now returning to Armenia as refugees. I mean, it's in a horribly awful circle. And they're coming back to a country they've only spent a little bit of time in, but they were calling themselves Syrian Armenians. And we also interviewed the president and the foreign minister and a whole bunch of folks there. Shop
owners. I got to go and visit a center where doctors who are Syrian Armenians have set up a center where they're actually giving free medical care to now the refugees that are coming in. It was like really one of those moments where, again, like Dean said, I probably in my entire life never thought of Armenia once. And I'm not trying to be negative, but I mean, where does Armenia come up in my conversation?
That was my next question to you. Like, what were your expectations before you went to Armenia? And what came out after your trip to Armenia?
Well, like Dean, we had to both educate ourselves to even be a part of this project. And so I was ready, but I don't think I was ready for what I saw, because it's like the tale of two countries. You
weren't ready for what you saw?
I wasn't ready for the tale of the Armenian refugees and seeing their plight, but understanding even in Armenia, just like here in the United States. I mean, when people come here, if you're a refugee, you don't jump right to the upper middle class ranks. And so, I believe that the Armenian government's doing all they can. The people of Armenia are doing all they can. but they also need some help from outside of Armenia
Well,
to do a
Armenia
little more.
and it's currently being, it's obviously being strangled right now
Sure.
with the closed Turkish border and the closed Azeri border, and so it's very difficult. It's very difficult for Armenia to help and try to provide for these folks. Of course, they're doing it as best they can. The United States, we would like to see the United States do more to help that situation, but I think it was surprising to me is to be there and to speak to these refugees and not have them look or act the way many people in America might picture a refugee. Right. I mean, I was like, one guy was an actor. He could have very easily been on set with me anytime doing something, and I'm like, this guy, he just wants to be back there doing theater. Another guy was a hairdresser, and he just, he wants to be cutting hair and styling hair, and just you don't really realize that when you're sitting at home watching the news, that these are just everyday folks who just want to have their life there. And these guys were born and raised in Aleppo. It was very difficult, and it was interesting also just to see in Yerevan itself the juxtaposition of like the old parts of the city and then the new stuff going up. It's really interesting to see that sort of history. It's incredible. Yeah.
Did you guys get a chance to visit Artsakh?
We did not go to Artsakh on purpose.
We don't want to cause an international incident that would have then caused trouble for what we're trying to actually do, and that's present, the real truth without, an agenda.
And these survivors of the genocide in Armenia that you interviewed, what were your reactions at the moment where you actually saw this person?
Well, the hard part, I think, is
talking
when
about
you see
what they lived through,
there's this
right?
lady, this woman, she is so compelling because she's so full of, energy, and she's got a lot of spunk to her. She's just like, raring to go and funny and laughing. And then the second she starts to recall the things that happened, it goes to a very sad place that, obviously can never be fixed. But you see this person who literally looks like she's so full of energy and almost youth, and she's got that pluck to her, and then all of a sudden she goes back to that memory and it just destroys her. And you see that here she is 105 years old, and it brings it right into your face. It's such a human situation.
I'm so happy and proud to be a part of this and actually get out and be able to make people look outside of themselves and their own experience and recognize that, we're only maybe one half a government in several countries away from this happening again right now. And so the important thing is just to have the discussion. The fact that we're sitting here right now, and I think people tuning in, if you cut the sound, they would have no idea that we're sitting here talking about Armenian genocide. And they would laugh if you said that's what we're talking about. But we need to get people to stop laughing and start listening.
And so you screened the film in Congress.
In D.C., we did in Washington, D.C. We had a number of congressmen there. But it wasn't specifically for Congress. We then spent some time lobbying people in Congress to pass a House resolution, as House Resolution 220, which would recognize the Armenian genocide and a lot of persecution of Christians going on throughout the world right now. And they're, if not the most persecuted religious group, they're pretty close to it. And so that's what we wanted to get done. And we'd love to see the United States government recognize the genocide. Obviously, there's a lot of politics at play. We'll see how that plays itself out, but we're hopeful.
And we'll stay out in the forefront of that, trying to make sure we move that forward. I think in some ways, there have been statements that have been made in the past that are tacit acknowledgments, but we want the Congress to pass a binding resolution so that now the world will recognize that we are paying attention.
And Montel, earlier when we were speaking outside, I think you mentioned that you will screen it at the UN.
Yes, on the 14th of December, and it's very interesting because this has not all been just easy rollout, red carpet, come on in and show us your movie here. I mean, we ran into some issues in California, we ran into some issues in Washington, D.C., and I am an envoy to two committees at the UN. I'm part of the Shark Coalition and the Save Our Oceans Coalition, one from Jamaica, the other from Dominica. So I'm a special envoy. 2.5 years ago, I got to present the motion picture, 12 Years a Slave. In the UN, in the General Assembly, it was over 800 people showed up, the packed house. They watched, even the Secretary General watched for about 30 minutes before he left. We tried to do the same thing with this movie, and they said no. And part of the reason why, and it wasn't, they just said to me, look, if you really want us to push this month off, we will, but I'm going to tell you, it's not going to happen, and it's going to turn ugly, so why don't we do this next best thing? So on the 14th, across the street from the UN, at One UN Plaza, at the #1 hotel that all UN people go to, we've turned their ballroom into a theater, and we're going to be holding it and doing special invitations. We're doing special invitations to everyone from the mayor to politicians in New York City to UN members, and lots of New York celebrities will be showing up. So this is going to be a big one.
Just the last little question. After working for 4 or 5 years on this, you guys had to pick up a little bit of Armenian? No?
Oh my.
Some Armenian?
Oh my.
Come on. Montel, I think you studied Russian during your...
по-русски.
Ты говоришь по-русски? Я тоже говорю по-русски.
Я забыл много слов. I forgot so much.
Ты прекрасно говоришь по-русски. Did you get to practice your Russian in Armenia?
You know, I got to say hellos a couple times. I know I shocked a couple of doormen. I walked up to one of them and said, "Здравствуйте, господа." They went,
Dean?
Nothing. I spoke to him in Spanish and it just freaked him out. But I can't wait to go back. I think we're going back early next year.
early next year, and I'm hoping, it's going to sound crazy, but when we were flying in, I kept looking out the window going, you know, that'd be the perfect spot to go heliboarding. That would be the perfect spot to go heliboarding. So I'm taking a board back with me, just in case for that one day we get a little break, I'm going to jump up and get a little snowboard.
Keep a tracker on you so we can find you. I'm not going with you.
Thanks for being with us today.
It was our pleasure. Thank you for having us.